Hi, in a previous video we concluded looking at the different types of form elements you could use in a Google form, in a new Google form. And we also broke it up into sections. So one thing I'd like to show you is if you don't want your sections anymore, I'm now in section 2, you can simply come down here and say merge with above. And that's the way it's going to preserve all your questions for you and still get rid of those section breaks if you don't want them. Okay, I'm going to take a few minutes and clean up this form to make it easier for us to use going forward. Okay, I've greatly simplified the form. It includes a first name, a last name, the classes you've taken, and 3 questions about your experience with various Google products. Okay, let's fill it out a couple of times and so we can get some data and look at how that works. So I'll go to Preview. So I've completed this form a number of times. Let me come back in and you can see that I now have 5 responses. Along the top I have 2 options, question and responses. So as I'm working on the form, I'm in questions and I can still make edits to it if I want. But when I hit responses, it's going to show me the fields and the values for each of the fields. It's going to do so in a nice graph format. So let's take a brief look. First name and last name is obvious. This first name is associated with this one. So this is Joe Smith, Mary, Contrary, etc. Courses I've previously taken, it looks like 4 out of the 5 have taken brains, and that's 80% of the total. 3 out of the 5 have taken data, etc. Please rate the following applications for usefulness. So how many people rated it great or fair. Now notice that these only total to 4, and yet I have 5 responses. That's because I submitted responses or 1 response prior to creating that question. So you really want to get your form completely in shape before you start submitting responses. The other problem is if you do a lot of tests on it, that data will be preserved. So you've got to be a little careful about that. You could always make a copy of it and use the copy. So that's a good solution. You test it, you play with it, you make a bunch of submissions, and then you copy it and use that copy without testing it. And so, as I said, very nice presentation of data. This is summary data. You can also go to individual, and this is just showing you what this particular person submitted. Let's see, so this is the one where I just put some nonsense in there and I had this question, he filled it out, and these questions are blank, and that's because these questions didn't exist at the time this individual took it. If I go to number 2, Joe Smith, you can see that all his information is preserved, and you can page through this if you wish. You can print it, or you can delete this particular response. Okay, so let me actually come back to number 1 because this one's not very useful to me, and I'm just going to delete that response. Are you sure you want to delete it? It cannot be undone. Yes, I am. Now I've only got 4 responses, but the data is a little more useful, a little more accurate. For those of you used to working with Google Forms, if I come back to my drive, and this is my test form, you might notice that there's no corresponding Sheets file to accept the data. So I see my test form here, but previously I would have seen this green icon and this Sheets file that was actually accepting my data, and you're not going to see that automatically anymore. So in order to get that, you can either use the Create Spreadsheets button, or you can say select response destination, and those 2 things will bring you to the exact same window. This will give you some information about how to do it, but it's pretty simple. If you had set up a spreadsheet, you could select that spreadsheet. Now why would I want to do that? if I had additional programming in there, if I had taken a sheet and maybe made some custom graphs and tied those into sections of the sheet, well, I'd want to select that instead of recreating it. But right now, I'll just let it create a new spreadsheet for me. And they are linked. And now, if I click this button, it will bring me directly into the sheet. So I can see that my data is right there. Alternately, if I'd gone to my drive, I can see that it has now created a file with the same name as my form, except that the word responses is in parentheses, and that it is actually not a form but a Google Sheet. Okay, other options in here would be to download the responses in a CSV file, print all the responses, delete all the responses, or get email notifications for new responses. So this is a great option if you've got the type of form up that isn't time limited. So if I've given a survey and I've said you have a week to complete that and there's an end date on it, well, I'm just going to look in there occasionally, and I don't need to be pestered with emails. However, if I have a suggestions form up there where at any time students can go in and kind of fill out some information on the class and give me some feedback, I'm going to want to turn that on, and then that will come in through my email. Now, in previous videos, we looked at Gmail and how to set filters and things like that. So you can do that creatively. If you're not using the Gmail account regularly, you can do that creatively to forward these on to an account that you do check regularly. Lastly, I'd like to review the options available to you in the menu bar across the top. So previously, we've looked at color palette. We know that we can change the color scheme of the form. There's an additional option in the lower right, and this allows us to select pictures or themes that are already loaded in. Or I can go to upload photos, where I could choose a picture from my desktop or my albums. So let's take the startled man again, just because he's available. And it's telling me I can only select images between 800 by 225. So this one is just too large. Let's see if that one works. Yes, the keyboards work. And I can do some limited cropping on this. And that appears across the top. We'll go back to something a little more peaceful. Okay, we've looked at the preview button before. This is where you get a live copy of your form to either test submit or to just view. Settings. These are very important. You can limit the responses to one per user. However, when you do this, the respondents will be required to sign into Google. This is most useful if you're working out of a Google Apps environment where students have Gmail accounts through the school. You require that they sign in to fill out the form, and then they're only allowed to submit it once. Otherwise, this is not terribly useful, because in my case, I have several private accounts. I could just sign in, independently to several accounts. Do you want to allow your respondents to edit after they submit? And do you want to allow them to see summary charts and responses? So some of those graphs that we were looking at when we saw responses, do we want to make those available to students after they submit, or parents? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. If it's confidential information, then obviously not. If it's some type of survey or general interest thing, very often it would be good to let them see it. It would be good to let them see how other people have responded. Now again, when working in a Google Apps environment, you may get some additional options up here as well. Presentation. Do you wish to show a progress bar? So along the bottom, if there's 20 questions, it's going to show them they've completed 3 out of 20, 4 out of 20, 5 out of 20. You can shuffle the question order. So this is useful in something like a quiz. So if I'm going to make a quiz and I shuffle them, it makes it harder for students to look at the computer adjacent to them and to copy answers. Also, each individual question gives you the option, or many of the questions give you the option of shuffling the answer order also, so that's a good choice when doing a quiz. Do you want to show link to submit another response? So if they've completed it once, do I want to let them easily, because they can do it anyway, but do I want to let them easily cycle back with a click and submit again? And that does make sense in some cases. What if I'm doing journal entries or reading log entries? So I've created up a form for reading logs, and a student may go in and submit Fridays reading time and Saturdays and Sundays. And they may want to do it 3 times. So depending on the type of thing that you're doing, that's will determine whether you should select these options or not. The last thing is a confirmation message. After they submit, they will go to a confirmation page, and right now it will tell them your response has been recorded, but it doesn't have to. Thank you for completing. Okay. So I'm going to tell them, I'm going to thank them first and then send them to Google Classroom for your assignment. So I'll make a little room there for the link. And in case I want to reuse this form, I'm just going to give them the link to classroom.google.com. So if they were to click this link and were not logged in, it's going to ask them to log in. And if they are logged in, it's going to bring them to their selection of classes. So if I copy a particular class into this form, I could do that. I could take the URL of a particular class and put it in here. But then this form is really going to be limited to that class because it's going to redirect people to the wrong place if I decide to use it in another class. So let me save that. I'll preview it, complete it very quickly. And she's taken quite a few classes. She has a lot of experience. She thinks everything is just great. And Google Forms is just great. And now you can see that I'm getting this link right here. If she were to click that, it's going to redirect her into the space. Now, because I'm logged in, it brings me right into my class selection, and I just have to choose the class. So I think that's probably the most efficient way to do it. I'll skip this option for a second and come back to it. Under these settings, I could make a copy of the form, which can be very useful. Just make sure that you get it linked up to a new sheet as well. Okay, I can trash it here. I can get a pre-filled link. So I could come here and fill out this form, click submit, and then I would get a link that if I sent that link, the form would be pre-filled out for anybody who clicked it. Okay, I can print the form itself, and importantly, I can add collaborators. So if this is something I'm working on with somebody else, another teacher, I can click that and I'll go to my normal sharing screen where I can get that done. Now, this button, Send, simply brings me to an email screen where I can, send it to someone, subject line, message. I can include the form itself in the email and add collaborators from here as well. So those are the basic settings in Form. Our last video, which we'll do next, will look at how to create quizzes using Google Forms.